Hi, my name is Gina Schroeder, GinaSchroeder. I'm 34 years old and I am white. I have been a mother for 6 years. I have a daughter named Haley who is 6 years old and a son named Brendan who is 19 months old. The good and the bad about being pregnant. The good thing about being pregnant was that I got to pretty much eat whatever I wanted to eat. The bad thing about being pregnant was I was just one of those women who I just wasn't a fan of being pregnant. I was always tired. I was always cranky. When I wanted to eat, I needed to eat right now, not later.
Trying not to.
Well, you're gonna have to hold them. Do I need to start over?
No, just keep going.
I don't even know what I just said. What was the last thing I said?
Start over at question 1.
The good thing about being pregnant was that I got to eat pretty much whatever I wanted. The bad thing about being pregnant is that I was always tired. I was always cranky. When I wanted to eat, I needed to eat right then and there. Otherwise, I started to feel a little bit nauseous. The other bad part is that I did get to eat whatever I wanted, but I also gained a lot of weight through both my pregnancies. I had a lot of complications in both my pregnancies. My first pregnancy, I had the most complications. I started to get lower abdomen kind of cramping about 15 weeks. I actually was doing some work where I was constantly on my feet. So my doctor thought it was best if I didn't work and just stayed off my feet for, a good length of time just to see if any of the cramping would stop. So I was on minimal bed rest at home starting at 14 weeks. Everything seemed to be going okay. I did have some contractions here and there that I would feel, even though as a first pregnancy, it's a little hard to tell. You don't really know what a contraction feels like. I just had some tightening down there. About 24 weeks, we started doing the fetal fibronectin test, which is the test where they do like a little swab, and the swab will tell you if you're going to go into labor within a 2-week period. So we did our first one at 24 weeks, and that one came back negative. So 2 weeks later, at 26 weeks, she did the fetal fibronectin test again, and I remember standing there in the kitchen. I was making dinner. My husband was at work, and I remember getting the phone call from my doctor telling me that the test had come back positive and that I needed to pack my bags and we needed to head to the hospital. That feeling of thinking that I was about to go into labor and I was only 26 weeks along through the pregnancy was one of the most terrifying things I have ever experienced. So we headed to the hospital and they checked us in, and the crazy thing is within about 5 or 6 hours of being in the hospital, I started going into full contractions, full labor. So they put us on what is it they put us on? Are you gonna have to start this whole thing over?
Keep going.
How are you gonna piece this together?
You're gonna have to start. It's gonna be question by question.
So we headed to the hospital, and within about 4 to 5 hours of being in the hospital, I actually started going into full contractions. I actually started laboring. So they had me on some tributaline to stop the contractions, and then they had to put me on some magnesium also as well to stop the contractions. We had a lot of support from our OBGYN doctor. I mean, I feel if she hadn't taken the steps to start the fetal fibronectin test, I'm not sure if I would have actually known that I was, going into labor. And the scary thing is what if, I would have labored at 26 weeks without being at the hospital. So that's a really scary thought. And I thank my doctor every day because I feel like without her taking that authority to do that test, I'm not sure how everything would have actually turned out. So we were in the hospital. We got a lot of information from the NICU doctors about what was happening and what the possibilities were and outcomes were if I was about to have a baby at 26 weeks. That was really scary for my husband and I. Doctors telling you that the possibilities of your child being in the NICU for many weeks, the possibilities of your child not making it, or the possibilities of your child having, some brain damage was really scary. So I was in the hospital, not even allowed to get up. The only thing I could get up was to go use the restroom. I was off and on tributaline and magnesium until 31 weeks. Right at 31 weeks, one of the nurses had noticed that, my feet looked pretty swollen. So they decided to do the preeclampsia testing to see if by chance I had started preeclampsia. Well, within about 24 hours, all the preeclampsia tests had come back positive, and they actually had worsened. I now was in a situation where the preeclampsia turned into HELP syndrome. And HELP syndrome is something that is very, very serious. So here we were on all this medication trying to keep my child in, and then the next thing I knew, they couldn't get her out fast enough. We were at the point where my platelets were so low that if they didn't go in and do an emergency C-section right then and there, then I was going to have to get put under in order to have my child. So I was 31 weeks, and she was born via C-section. She was exactly 4 pounds. Prior to that, she did get 2 sets of steroid shots. They were doing that as precaution. So she did need a little bit of oxygen when she came out, but she actually came out a very, very healthy child. She did spend about 14 days in the NICU. She really just kind of needed some help with her feeding, so she did come home about 33 weeks, just shy of 4 pounds. However, after I had delivered her, within 24 hours, I was a little too weak, so I wasn't even able to see her until the following day of having her. I also was having extreme amount of, upper stomach pain, so they were doing an ultrasound and found out that I had passed a kidney stone 24 hours after the C-section. So following that, I was in the hospital for a good extra, I would say 7 to 8 days. I ended up having to have 2 blood transfusions. Apparently I had lost a good amount of blood during the C-section. And I was also still having really high blood pressure. So delivering is supposed to help the preeclampsia. However, mine wasn't really going away. So I had the blood transfusions, and as long as I was able to keep monitoring my blood pressure and stay on the blood pressure medication, I was able to go home. So I did go home without my child. She stayed at the NICU, but I kept going back and forth to the hospital and staying there as long as I could with her, watching her with her feeds and everything. And now she is 6 years old. She has been as healthy as can be. She's had no long-term effects from being 9 weeks early. And then it took us about a good 5 years before we decided to have another child. Going through what we went through with our first child was scary, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to possibly go through that again. So when we found out we were pregnant with our second child, my OBGYN sent me immediately to a high-risk doctor. She felt that this is exactly where I needed to be, considering that everything that we had gone through with my daughter, that high-risk doctor was the place that needed to take care of me. So I actually started contracting with my second child about 14 weeks. So they had made the decisions with me that we were going to go in and do a cerclage, which is sewing my cervix together, at 16 weeks. So I went in for surgery. They sewed my cervix together, and everything was pretty normal for till about week 28, week 29, I did start to get a lot of pressure, a lot of cramping down there. So my doctor once again put me on bed rest. However, prior to going on bed rest, I was having some contractions. So starting at 18 weeks, I would go to the doctor once a week and get progesterone shots. And the progesterone shots actually was kind of like a lower muscle relaxer. And it kind of helped me from continually getting those contractions. They weren't really contractions that I would feel, but every week I would go in and get an ultrasound, they could see that I was having the minimal contractions through the ultrasound. But he was growing normal, he was growing fine. So 28 weeks is when I really started to get the full pressure. So she put me on again a limited bed rest where I just basically had to stay off my feet for a majority of the time. At about 34 weeks, I was in a great deal of pain. 35 weeks, I went into the doctor. I had so much pain down there. I was crying. I didn't know what was going on. And my son had actually broke through one side of the cerclage. So he was ready to come out at 35 weeks. She really, really wanted to keep him until 36 weeks because we got in a steroid shots for him to help make sure his lungs were developed when he was born. So I was put on complete bed rest, not allowed to get up for the next week. We scheduled the C-section right at 36 weeks. We went in and had the C-section, and during the C-section, my husband and I kind of noticed that it was taking a long time after he was born, that, to close up usually doesn't take that long, but we kind of noticed that they were taking a long time. Apparently my bladder had shifted during the pregnancy, and when she was doing the C-section, she nicked my bladder. So she was in there actually stitching up and repairing my bladder from my bladder nicking itself. So I did have to spend a couple extra days in the hospital while my bladder healed, but he came out perfectly fine. He didn't need any oxygen. He didn't need any assistance. He was just like a normal, typical child. The tests that were elected for me to do during the pregnancy was, all we did was the fetal fibronectin tests. I did the regular glucose test. I did most of all the regular blood tests. My husband and I decided not to do any of the Down syndrome tests. We felt that we were keeping both children no matter what the test outcomes were, so we didn't actually feel the need to know any of the answers to those tests. I did the blood tests for the preeclampsia, and then the fetal fibronectin tests I only did with my first. My knowledge about experience with preterm labor was extremely minimal. I mean, through my first child, you read all those books about how your pregnancy is going to be, how the delivery is going to be, and I felt like all those books that I read didn't apply to me. Everything happened in such a different way for us that I was learning everything as we were going. However, when I did spend, the 8 weeks in the hospital prior to having my daughter, I did do as much research as I could, and the NICU doctors and all the high-risk doctors at the hospital really did the best that they could to give us all the knowledge that they could give us. But it was still scary because you just don't know what was going to happen. I never thought I was going to have a C-section. There I was in the hospital trying to keep my child in. So the last thing I thought was a C-section, but unfortunately I did get the preeclampsia and the HELLP syndrome, so I did end up having the C-section. So the risk factors I knew going into my second child. I knew all the risks. I was 100% knowledgeable on all the preterm. So I basically really watched all the signs that I had learned from prior from my first pregnancy. So the risk factors I actually was very aware of, and my high-risk doctor at the time, she kept extending the knowledge to us and letting us know how everything was going to go. I didn't actually know anybody that had a preterm labor or any pregnancy issues prior to me. I had only had friends that had a hard time getting pregnant, but not actually with preterm labor. So the first, my first child with this preterm labor, this was new to me. This was new to my family. This was a very new, real, scary thing for everybody. The treatments that I was aware of, I wasn't aware of any treatments my first pregnancy, but my second pregnancy, I was aware of the treatments. I was aware that I could go in and get a cerclage to keep my cervix together as long as possible. Other than that, I wasn't really, they didn't really give us any other precautions that we could do besides the fact that I did get the progesterone shots, which the progesterone shots did help relax my muscles and keep me from laboring intensely. If there were any kind of blood test to predict if I was going to have preterm labor, I would have 100% have done that. There would have been no question. It is scary to know that every pregnancy is different and you just have no idea why you have the preterm labor. After my first child, we went through all the genetic testing. The doctors went through every test that blood test wise, that they could give me to see if they could find a reason of why I went into preterm labor, and nobody had any answers for us. So I think that was the scary part, which is why it took us a good 5 years to have another child, because I was so scared, and because we didn't get any answers of why I had such early preterm labor with my first. I am healthy, I take care of myself. So that is what's scary, is that you just don't know what your pregnancies are going to be like until you get pregnant. So yes, I would definitely get any kind of blood test that I could to stop preterm labor, or to know that I was going into preterm labor. Thank you.